what about how is speech produced, right? So how do we speak? How do I remember? I told you that initially I need to create a message in my brain. My brain creates a message, then it figures out in what language I want to say and what words I want to produce, right? So I remember I said even to ask, do you want to go for lunch? I can formulate in English itself many ways. Do you want to go for lunch? Lunch. Uh, shall you go for lunch? Um, it's lunchtime. I can say so many things, all conveying the message that shall we go for lunch, right? So these are the different things that we do, right? But the physical speech signal, how is it produced? Okay, physically we need the lungs to produce the air flow, right? So speech, remember, it's only a compression rarefaction that's coming out, right, out of my mouth. So the lungs force the air out of the through the our the trachea and all these things, right? So at this point, there's something called glottis, right, which is nothing but the vocal cords that open and close. Okay, so when the air rushes out, right, so basically when it closes, I'll come to that. The vocal cords are basically the reason why we open and close, right? And so lungs force the air out of it, the glottis opens and closes, and then we shape the mouth to produce different sounds. For example, when I say ooh, I do round my lips and protrude them out. When I say e, I have to push. You can see e. My tongue, that has to go just behind the teeth here. E, right? Or when I say oo, the lips are coming out. When I say ah, you can see that I open the mouth and actually ah, it's almost, the tongue is, almost flat and it's one uniform kind of tube that comes out. It's curved, but that's the way we produce ah, right? So different sounds are produced by changing the mouth to different positions, right? So that's why when you speak, they ask you not to eat, right? Why? Because this tube, there are two things, right? So it also feeds to your stomach, right? And if you try to speak, right, then at the same time as you're eating, so then the tube, it's not, it either closes one part or the other part, right? So if you speak and you're eating by mistake, it might go into your lungs, which is bad, right? You might also get, the food particles get lodged, then it will create an infection, you might get pneumonia and so on. So that's why normally we don't speak when you don't eat when you speak, or you don't speak when you eat. Okay, so that's why we have to be careful when you're eating, otherwise you can choke also. Okay, so and because we are using this lungs, right? So, and I'm tired right now, you can see I am actually using a lot of the energy, right? My lungs have to force the air out of my mouth while I'm speaking, right? And therefore it is a tiring. So there is energy, right? The source of energy that is there is actually the lungs, right? That is giving me the energy to speak. Okay. So I was talking about the glottis, and the glottis operates on a very simple principle. So when we close and the lungs are forcing air, right? Because of the pressure build up, the glottis will open, right? It will. So I'll keep it like this. So you can imagine my air is coming like this, so that you can see it will open like this. Okay, and therefore the air will flow out. Okay, once the air flows out, the Bernoulli principle, right? So when it is flowing out, obviously it's going with a higher speed, then it creates a low pressure, right? So what happens? It pushes this thing back and it closes, right? So again, the air pressure builds from here and forces these two vocal cords. These are two muscle masses, right? They force apart, the air rushes, and again the Bernoulli principle kicks in and it pulls it together. Okay, so this is done repeatedly many times. So whenever you say you can see the vibration e, ooh. So you can see that there are vibrations. That is nothing but the vocal cords opening and closing. Okay, and obviously it's a physiological process, right? So there is physically some mass moving and closing. So there is a question of mass is there, right? And generally males tend to be larger and taller and larger. Therefore, they have more larger muscle masses here, and so therefore they can open. There's more inertia and so on. So they open and close much more slowly, right? So the males are, which is basically the pitch that you're talking about, is only in the ballpark of 100 to 150 cycles per second, the opening and closing. Okay, women by and large physiologically, right, by and large are smaller in size, right? They are shorter, they are more lighter in weight, and therefore the these are lighter things, so they can open and close much faster, right? And therefore the women, they typically have anywhere in the ballpark of from 180 to about 240, 250 in that ballpark, right? The children are even more smaller, right? They're normally, even if they're growing, they're 18, 17, 15. The younger they are, the more, the muscles are even more lighter, so they can open and close much more faster, right? And that's why we say, oh, shrill voice of the child, right? When it cries and it creates this, so it's very jarring to the ear, and that's because the pitch, the frequencies that they produce are much, much higher. Okay, they can be in the ballpark of even 400 hertz. Okay, so this is the basic principle in which we produce these different, opening and closing. And that is why when you're a musician, you have to train these things, right? So otherwise you're going to tear the muscle, you're going to hurt the muscle, right? So that's why you have to do this alap, you have to avoid these cold things. You don't want to affect these vocal cords, so they're very, very important to produce higher and higher pitch, or you can control them, but you need practice to do that, right? It's just like a marathon or something, right? Unless you can't on the first day itself run 226 kilometers, right? You have to build that ability, right? And that is what we are talking about when they do these practice in the mornings, right? So, so as I said, different sounds are produced by manipulating the mouth in different positions, right? And again, this is almost done instinctively. When you are learning, when you are young, we imitate our parents or elders and other people around us and mimic the sound, and then the ear tells us whether you are producing the correct sound or not. Which is why, if you are, if you are not able to hear, right, if you are deaf, the feedback is not there. You don't know how to produce a sound. You don't know if you're producing it correctly or not, right? And that's why it's more difficult if the feedback is not there for you to produce the correct sounds, right? So that is why, ear is when you are disabled in some extent, then you also need to correct this so that you can speak properly. Okay, so when I say right, you can see here that this is pretty much here. This is the vocal cords opening and closing, the air gushing out of the lungs, and it comes out of the mouth. So it is like a almost a uniform tune, like father, right? And if I'm right, you should try it out at home. Try to say first of all, there's vibration. Secondly, the way you're pushing it, your tongue upwards. So you can see the tongue is closing at the upper, just behind the teeth, right? Ooh, right? So, ooh, right? So you can see that at the back there's ooh, right? Two things happening. The protrusion, the lips become rounder, more smaller, and the tongue is right at the back, somewhere here. Okay, and so you can see this periodicity is coming, right? Periodic opening and closing. That's because of the glottis opening and closing. So here one glottis cycle. So from here to here, one opening and closing of the glottis, one opening and cycle, one opening. So they are always periodic. So whenever you have this voiced okay, all of these are voiced sounds. Okay, and therefore you will have some periodic cycles that you will see in the time domain. This is a time domain signal. So if I take it, if I measure this using a microphone and I plot it, this is the way the signal will look. Okay, this is time domain. But we have learned that ear is sensitive. We always want to do Fourier analysis, right? So time domain is one way of looking at the signal. Frequency domain is the other way of looking at signal. So if I look at this time domain signal and do its Fourier transform, it will look like this. Okay, the Fourier transform of E, which is a time domain here, its Fourier transform will look like this. Okay, the time domain signal of U is like this, and its Fourier transform will look like this. Okay, one good thing, one strange thing you will notice is that, sorry, I just have to go back, is that this is actually dependent on your high school physics. Okay, so if you remember, if I have a uniform tube, right, and I excite it, right, a closed tube, open tube, there are many things that you would have seen, and you would see that the length, that the frequencies, right, the harmonics that you produce, right, the resonant frequencies that you produce is given by 2n plus 1, right? That is the thing. Then C will come, that is the speed of sound, divided by 4 times the length of the tube, right? So therefore, these harmonics depend on the length of the tube, right? So that actually the sound is almost like a uniform tube, okay? Therefore, it only depends on the length of the tube. So roughly, if you see, it's obviously not perfect tube. So you should see frequencies at 1000, 500, 1500, something of that order you will get, okay? 2500 and so on, okay? Of course, see, you can see here 2500 is there, some slightly away, but in the ballpark, okay? It's actually, if you produce if it's a perfect uniform tube, it will be like this, but this is nature, right? We're not producing tube and it is slightly curved tube and so on, but you can see that this happens. But when you are producing something like E, it is like two tubes, one tube with certain area, another tube with a wider area and so on. We can do analysis of these tubes, right, with using boundary conditions and so on. And again, you can get some resonant frequencies, okay. And similarly, U will get some resonant frequencies. These are the dominant frequencies present for the sound, right. And this is the basis on which we produce or recognize different sounds that we produce, okay. So if you look at the waveform, it's not very clear whether this waveform is, it looks different, but how do I characterize it, right? How do I identify? Is there an automatic way of saying that this corresponds to a sound A, this corresponds to a sound E, this corresponds to a sound U? Remember, the whole purpose of today's speech technology is, can we automate a lot of this? Can we do machine learning? Can we do deep learning? Can we do some artificial intelligence? Can we do something that automatically things can be figured out, right? It's much more easier in the frequency domain, right? Because these frequencies, these dominant guys are around 500, 1500, 2500, whereas for E it's around 250, then around 2200 and 3200. So these two look very different, right? And U is even more, 250, 750 and somewhere around 2500, right? So sounds can be distinguished more easily when you look in the Fourier domain, when you look in the frequency domain, okay. And therefore, almost all of our analysis in speech, we will do it in the frequency domain, because the information is much more visible in the frequency domain, okay. So now let's talk about this. What we talked first is the glottis opening and closing. So E, U, right? And this seems to be very close to the vowels, okay. So therefore, even as like in written language, in spoken language also we use this concept of vowels, okay. In written language, how many vowels are there in English? Those vowels, right? What are they? They are A, E, I, O, U, okay. So those are the 5 vowels in written language, okay. But in spoken language, even in English, we don't have 5, we have much more. We have A, that's a spoken A, spoken vowel A, spoken vowel E, spoken vowel U, okay. But there is a difference between A and A, okay. What is the difference? This first, it's not that I am speaking it for a longer period of time, and A. So in my mouth, if you look at the tongue, if you look at the tongue, it's in the middle, towards the front of the mouth. When I say ah, it's actually the back. So if you say it slowly, you can see where the tongue is. Ah and okay. So everything is slightly different configuration, and therefore the frequencies it produces are also different. So these are two different sounds. So there is no there's a and ah. There are two vowels when you speak. Okay. Similarly, I and e. Okay. It and heed. So when I say it, you can say I. It's again towards the front, and when we say heed, he, it's at the back. Okay. Then u and oo. Okay. So you can start seeing that Indian languages are much more phonemic, or we'll see what the term phoneme means. But Indian languages have very close correspondence between the written and the spoken part. We do have, when you write in Devanagari, right? What do you write first? I, u, oo, right? We write all the vowels. Those are actually also closely corresponding to the written part and the spoken part. In English, unfortunately, that's not the case. In English, we have A, E, I, O, U, the 5 vowels in the written part. But in the spoken part, they have many more vowels. Typically, there are about 10 to 12 vowels in most languages around the world. Okay, so you can count E. You can write the first, the whole vowel series that we write when you write in Hindi Devanagari, right? When you write all these characters, right? You see that first we write the vowels. Actually, that is why we say that we are very structured language, right? Unlike English, right? You will see that they are organized along the way we actually produce sounds. Okay, so the organization of the ways we write the letters also are very well organized. Okay, so this is something that I was talking about vowels. So there are about 10 to 12 different vowels. So the written ones, of course, are A, E, I, O, U in English, but the spoken ones are A, E, E, U, all A, I, O, aha, and all that, right? And in Hindi, of course, these two are very close. Then we have something called diphthongs, which are combinations of vowels like boat, o, see it's boy, o and a, oi, right? Boy, o and a, both are coming into the picture, right? So and we say it in quick succession, they are called diphthongs. Okay, so phonemes are basically the alphabets of the different sounds that we produce. These are the building blocks for the spoken language. Just like the different alphabets, the different written alphabets, right? In English, it's A to Z, right? In English, in Hindi, it's A, E, I, U, Hindi all the way, Ka, Ka, Ga, Ga, all this, right? Yara, Lava, and all that, right? So, in spoken language, whether it's English or other languages, we look at what are the basic units that we produce, the basic configuration of the mouth, right, to produce the different sounds. And this is done by the International Phonetic Association. So they will tell that if A is produced, this is the way the tongue has to be, this is the way the mouth has to be, this is the way that jaw has to be, and so on. So they have what's called the canonical position. If you say it in this way, the mouth is in this way, the jaw is in this way, the tongue is in this way, the sound that comes out is A. That is how they specify the different phonemes. Okay, so just like alphabets, characters are the written units for words, right? For writing words, in spoken language we have basic units which we call as basic spoken units, which you call as phonemes. Okay, so phonemes are the basic units from which we create speech, right? The phonemes we concatenate, just like if I concatenate letters, I get words, right? If I write A and D, 3 letters, I know that's the word and. If I say B-O-Y, I know it's a letter, it's a word boy, right? So similarly, in written spoken language, when I say boy, b, o, that is the diphthong, and boy, I. So those are the 3 sounds that constitute the 3 phonemes that add together to form the word, spoken word boy. Okay, so similarly, as I said, there is a quite close correspondence between the written and spoken. So in English, for example, the alphabets are only about 26. These are the building blocks for written language, right? For spoken English, we have about 44 to 48, depending on the phoneticians, different sounds from which English words are produced. Similarly, if you look at English, right, Hindi, right, so there is a very high correspondence between what we say and what we write, and therefore there are two, then the ksha and thra, ra, and all that is, so typically 44 is what most phoneticians will say are the spoken units, the basic building blocks of spoken Hindi, right? If you are willing to add all ksha and all that, then that will become 52. Okay, so this is so you have to remember how we write and how we speak, right? There is a close correspondence in many Indian languages, but not so much in the English language. Okay, and the basic units for spoken language is the phonemes. So I create different sounds. These are the basic building blocks which I concatenate to form words. Okay. So just like written language, we have vowels and consonants. the spoken language also we talk about voiced and unvoiced, and then unvoiced basically they have somewhat the parallel analogies like the consonants. We'll come to that, okay. And so these are the, for English you can see these are the different alphabets of the written spoken language, right. So E like beat, bit, then this is butter, but r, this part is a, okay. So and this is ba, bat, bob, okay. So and this is diphthong, bought, ought, bought, o and a both are coming in close succession. This is called a diphthong, okay. And you can have some nasals like all these things, right. And then we have what's called the stops, p, I'll come to that, t, and all these things, okay. And then fricatives and so on, okay. So you can say these are the basic spoken units of sound for English. For Hindi they are close, but they will have some additional sounds. Some of these may not be present also, okay. So so how do we characterize these different sounds? One, as I said, is in terms of the glottis, the opening and the closing, right. So a, e, u, all the vowels you will see have voicing, right. That's one way of doing it. The other is also the way the tongue moves and where it is positioned. So that's called the place of articulation. So we characterize sounds based on many characteristics. One of which is of course the articulation manner, right. So so basically what these are the different ways that what's called manner of articulation, and I will not go into the details, but you will see a sort of a pattern, right. We have something called glides. I'm not spending too much time, right, but you can see this v, l, r, ya. And if you had seen in Devanagari, you can see yara, lava is put in one line, right. So that's why I said it's very, very structured language, right. I mean, in the sense, all the glides, even when we write, right, come together. So we already they have figured out that these belong to one category of sounds, right. And these are the nasals, right. And if you look at p, t, k, and b, d, g, right. So p, right. So that's how we have, right. P and b come, th and t come together, right. T and th. So these are basically and k and g, right. In Hindi we have k, kh, and g, gh, right. So these basically are one category, right. There are stops, then f, sh, z, all these things, right. So these are basically going to be what you call fricative, and her and here, right. So these are basically mixed source and whispered. So I'm not going to go into the details, but when you write, you'll see a lot of these things are common. And also another thing that I want to also say is, it's very difficult for us humans to even adjust, right. For example, somebody speaking Hindi, right, for them it's very natural. When I say k and I'm not good at Hindi, but let's say kawa, k and khadag. So that is the aspiration, khadag. It's actually gone back. If you see the way I say khadag and kawa, okay. But for South Indian, for example, a Tamil person, they are not used to this sound. There is no this khadag. So all that they will say is, it's not very easy for them to mimic at all. So that's why when they say kawa and when they say khadag, they'll just stress it more. Khadag. They'll say it more for a longer period of time, but the mouth configuration still continues to be the kawa ka ka, khadag, khadag, khadag. They don't put the aspiration, they don't put the tongue back and then produce the sound khadag, right? That is not produced, right? Or ghoda, ghoda, they cannot do that, right? Because from childhood they have learned in a particular way, the brain cannot adjust, right? So it's very difficult. So even we supercomputers, some sounds, it's all question of how we got trained. So we'll see the neural networks also can learn some bad things. So for example, I think zero, right? It's very difficult for many languages. Z is not easy to pronounce, right? The brain has got used to not producing that sound at all. So it does not know how to produce that sound. So we often say zero, right? That's nothing wrong. It's just that we have not been taught, or yum, because M, A, and ya. So there is a difference, that this sound is very difficult to produce because you have not been trained from childhood, right? And that's the same thing. A Westerner comes and says, Venkata, Venkata, Venkata. He cannot produce the sounds because in his brain that is very, very different, right? So language is something that you have to be sensitive, right? I mean, this is something that you have trained and learned. The fact that you don't know another language is because it's, first of all, once you age, it also becomes difficult to learn, but it's also a fact of your training process. So, for example, Zimbli, it's almost automatically something that they cannot say simply, right? Simply. So the way we say, that's where we talk about the dialectical variations, right? English, for example, where the pronunciation is different, right? Schedule versus schedule, right? That itself is a marked difference. Vitamins versus vitamins, right? So there is an issue. For example, the Chinese can never say ra. They'll always say l. Ra doesn't come. We Indians ourselves, we cannot say the v as in van. Okay, we always use the water and van. They are actually two different ways. Okay, for us, the vegetable that we say vegetable, the way we pronounce it should be vegetable, but we don't pronounce it. So an American can easily sense the difference in v, which we cannot, right? How much ever we Indians try, we cannot produce the normal Indians, right? I mean, unless you make an effort and you learn, right, to pronounce it as vegetable, we also say vegetable. Like how we say water, the same word we use for vegetable, right? And the American gets confused. What did you say? So he can distinguish or she can distinguish the two different words. For us, even now I cannot distinguish. To me, it all sounds the same. Okay, so that is the way languages evolve. So we learn different things as we grow, and these are things that we gets ingrained, and so it's often difficult for us to change, right? So that's why when we are native speakers, when we say something, a lot of the accent part gets still remains, right? You have to make an effort to actually change that. Okay. So, and similarly, we have the place of articulation, right? So, the manner is, here, what I was talking about is one of the manners, of course, of voicing versus unvoicing kind of thing, right? And the place of articulation is basically the tongue, basically labial, right? Labial. Pa, ba. So, we are talking about lips here, right? Pa, ba, ma. Okay, all of these involve the lips, so that's why these come under the category of labials. Labial, dental. Lab is lip, dental is teeth. So this obviously means I'm going to use both the lip and the teeth. So you can see, lip is there, teeth also come. Fan, fought, fat. Okay, and van. Okay, so and dental, right? Then alveolar, palatal, palate, right? So and so on, caveolar and pharyngeal. I'll not go into detail, but basically this is the way phoneticians will tell you how we distinguish different sounds. Okay. So, so these are, if you look at English, why are we focusing? Because these, I mean, although we have done a lot in Hindi, unfortunately, most of our textbooks are in English. Therefore, the study of English vowels and English phonemes are much more, there are much more material on it. So, we'll use that. But basic idea, same thing, we can do it for Hindi also, okay, or Indian languages, Tamil, Telugu, Marathi, Kannada, whatever you want, right? So, we have broadly the sounds, phonemes are the basic building blocks. Like characters, alphabets are for the written language. Here, spoken language has phonemes as the basic building blocks. We have vowels, right, which are, you can have front, mid and back. Remember, that is the place, right? So, where the tongue is the front or the middle or the back, right? And diphthongs are combination of vowels. Semi-vowels are the ear lower. And then we have consonants, we have nasals, then we have stops. If you see, there is no vibration. But B has vibration, K has no vibration, right? G, G has vibration, right? So this is the way, and D, D. So vibration is there for D, but Th does not have. So if you look at this voiced and unvoiced stops, the positions are all same. Whether there is a vibration or not is what distinguishes them. Okay. So this is basically what are the phonemes. So I will stop here because next I will talk about how do we how speech formed, right? It's a combination of these phonemes, and then how do we do automatic ways of identifying these sounds. That's what is automatic speech recognition, and how male versus female, right? These things can be easily found out from the signal itself, right? So if I want to do gender identification, if I want to do something simple, right, can I do it automatic? So we'll slowly start looking at how to automate, how can machines do things easily, right, for us, and we can exploit that for some useful applications. Okay, so I'll stop here, and yeah, thank you.